For our enrichment lesson today, we're going to focus on adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers. All right, so just a quick step back to last week when we were looking at finding the distance in between. So last week's lesson was important for you to understand the sense between the two numbers because it's going to help you today when you're calculating these types of problems. So quick review. All right, so if you start at -7, all right, and your ending point is +9, you are finding the distance in between, all right? And we had done what was called find the absolute, all right? So that's to find your negative number, the distance from the negative to 0. So it's always the opposite of the number. And I'll reveal that here, of course, which is the absolute value. And then you add your second part, which is 0 to your ending point, which was 9. All right, so the distance in between those two numbers was 16. So it's important to understand that because today when you are adding and subtracting negatives, it's going to help you realize which direction that you're going. All right, so let's look at some examples. All right, so our first one is you are going to start at 5 and add -2. All right, so you would see that as 5 plus -2 on your problem. And so let's just walk through it. All right, so starting point is 5. What's happening now is you are adding a negative, so that means you're subtracting. You're going backwards 2. All right, so 1, 2. The answer would be 3. So another way to look at it is 5 minus 2. You've been doing that for years, right? So don't get confused because it's saying plus a negative. All right, so another way you could think of that is you owe money to somebody or you lost money for something, a bet perhaps, and it's 5 minus that amount. All right, here's another example. All right, so our starting point here is -3. All right, so let's go to our number line. And what are we going to do now? We subtract 2. All right, so we go to the left 2. We lose $2 more. We owe $2 more. So now our answer is going to become greater on the negative side. All right, so it's the same thing as adding two negative numbers, 3 plus 2, but they're both negative. All right, so that's where you have to sense what's going on there. So the answer is -5. Next, starting point is 5, and now you are going -9, all right? 9 to the negative side, all right? So again, you go past 0, all right? And you go 5 to 0, and you're going to go 4 more. Right, so some of you guys are noticing this right away when you're ever subtracting a negative number, all right? It's the same thing as subtracting regularly, but then you have to realize, all right, since my starting point is less than my second number, it's going to end up on the negative side. All right, so it's always a way to check it. Whenever you have two different signs like that, you can always subtract regularly and then match the sign of the bigger number. Okay, so this is why number line is so important, because you're starting at 5 and then you're subtracting more than you have. So your subtraction difference has to be negative in that sense. All right, next example. All right, -2 plus 9. So on the opposite side now, you're going to start here, and now you are going to the positive side. So you're going to go to 0. All right, so this is where those absolutes came in handy, because you started with 2, and now you still need to go 9 units, right? So you need 7 more to go, and that's where the next part of 7 comes in. All right, so the other way you could think of it is you have the positive and the negative, right? So you have different signs, so you could subtract them. Right, and then your positive number is bigger than your negative absolute number. All right, so it has to be a +7. So lots of different ways to look at this. Next, we have starting point -8, and now our action is to add 8. All right, so we're going to go 8 this way, and this is where we're adding the absolute. So whenever you have opposites like this, you have an automatic answer of a 0. All right, so what you're doing is you're adding the absolute of your negative number, so it will get you back to 0. And our last example here on the slide, we have -1. And what we are doing now is we're adding a -8. All right, so you can look at that as subtracting 8 or having two owed amounts. All right, I lost $1 today. I lost $8 later in the day. And so I'm going to now go backwards by 8. And so that is going to be -9. So this is why it's important to understand what the action is and where you're coming from. All right, so let's look at some of the examples now in your worksheet. All right, so the examples will be a little bit different, but here are some ones to look through. So what do I have? My starting point is -5, and I'm going to +12. All right, or I'm adding +12. I'm not going to +12. That was last week's lesson. All right, so what I can do is I can count 12 jumps this way, but since I have, look at my signs, I have a negative number and a positive number. So those are different signs, right? So I can subtract, and that equals 7. And now I need to match the sign of the bigger number, my bigger absolute, all right? So that absolute is +12. That absolute is negative. So the absolute of 12 is bigger than the absolute of 5. So my sign has to be positive, all right? So my answer is going to be +7. All right, next one here, I start at 4, and I am going to subtract 8. All right, so right away you should realize that I am going to be on the negative side. So my answer is negative, and then since it's a subtraction problem, what you can do then is subtract regularly, 8 minus 4, and since I know my answer is going to be negative, it has to be -4. All right, and where does that come from again? It comes from the second part right here. This is an absolute of the negative number of 8, which is bigger than the absolute of 4. So a lot of different ways to look at it. All right, here we go. 5 minus 11, I'm starting at 5, and I'm subtracting more than I have, so my answer has to be negative, and then just subtract the numbers regularly. Okay, so that would be 11 minus 5 is 6, -6. How about this one? Starting point is 3, and now I am going to add -9. Other way to think of it is, you can rewrite it if you want, 3 minus 9. All right, so once you do that, you'll notice that I start at 3 and I'm going to lose more money than I have. All right, so now I'm going to subtract my two numbers, which is 6. But since I'm losing more money than I have, my answer has to be negative once again. All right, so a few more. Take a look here. Starting point -3. And what happens now? I am going to lose $11. All right, so what does that mean? I add my two negatives together. 3 plus 11 is 14, but it has to be negative. All right, so be careful with these. All right, it's the same thing as adding a negative number. All right, so last week when we had very simple ones, people made mistakes, and I thought that might happen if you guys weren't focused, so be careful now. So if I have $3 and I'm adding $12, all right, that's the same problem you've been doing since first and second grade. 3 plus 12, use the number line if you have to, 15. All right, once again, 4 plus 13, and we're not going to have two positives in a row like that, so no worries for your homework. +17. And then one more example here, two more examples really. All right, so here we go, 4, and now I'm adding a -11. So another way to think of that is I am subtracting 11. All right, so I lost 11. The negative number is more than the positive number, so that means I'm going to have a negative answer. I have different signs, different amounts, so I can subtract my numbers. 11 minus 4 is 7. But since the negative has the bigger absolute value, it is going to be a negative number. And then the last one here, we have the opposite approach. We start with a -9, and now we're going to add the absolute, so that gets me back to 0. All right, so don't confuse this last week with the distance formula when we were talking about when you have an absolute, you write it underneath and then you add, so that would be 18. That's not what this is saying. This is saying you lost $9 and then you earned $9, so your net balance is 0. All right, so use the number line up top to help you. Be careful. I know it seems really, really simple, but we make simple mistakes when we race through things. So this is a really, really good test of, I would say, self-control and focus today to go through every one of these 20 problems and make sure that you're using the strategy right. Any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great day. Have a great weekend. And happy Pentecost on Sunday.